Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are all doing well. And yeah, I hope I am audible enough for everybody. So today we are going to look at something we had left out the last time. I know I was supposed to send something over, but I just thought it would be better if I explained it. Don't know if you can call this personally or yeah. So today we're going to look at what is called the journal. The journal. This is just simply, it works under the same concept as le compte à colonne mariée, to be specific. So it just basically, we record our day-to-day transactions in this book. So it's what usually accountants use, or maybe small shops. If you've ever seen someone working in a small shop and they are continuously recording whatever they sell, it's a journal. It's a journal. So by definition, I'm going to give you the definition first in French, then I will explain it better in English. Alors, le journal est un document obligatoire et enregistré qui contient toutes les opérations effectuées par l'entreprise enregistrées de façon chronologique. So the definition is quite long, but I'm going to subdivide it. I'll be giving it to you in parts. So it says the first part is the journal is an obligatory book. So according to the graph, the figure I had sent you earlier on in the group, the journal is one of the major books of accounting that you are going to learn. So it is obligatoire. You cannot skip it and write other things. And secondly, it, like I had said before, we record our day-to-day transactions in the journal. So whenever you sell, buy goods, those are the transactions that are in question. So where we draw this information from would be from a question. They usually give us questions like, this day he sold goods, this day he bought goods, this day he paid rent. So our job is to register those in the journal in the right order. And lastly, the last part of the definition is de façon chronologique. So chronological order. It starts from the dates which correspond to a transaction. Let's say bought goods on the 1st, sold goods on the 3rd. So you are supposed to record the transactions in the journal in chronological order, where the transactions which come on the 1st are recorded on the 1st, and ainsi de suite. So then one more thing is that these transactions, or rather the entries that we make in the journal, are called écriture comptable. So that's it with the definition of the journal. Now we are going to look at how exactly we work, how exactly we draw up the journal, and what goes where and what goes there. So firstly, before we go to this diagram, which is on your screen, there are certain things that we go when writing something in the journal, there are certain things or certain.
Could you
Yes?
please repeat the definition of the journal? I was having connection problem.
Okay, so yeah, we start again. So it says le journal est un document obligatoire, sauf est un document obligatoire. So it's an obligatory document. I think that's self-explanatory. And the definition is divided into 3 main parts. So I will be explaining it to you part by part. So that's the first part. So the second part, it says qui contient toutes les opérations effectuées par l'entreprise. So this simply says the journal encompasses all the transactions which a business has or which a business makes, so to say. So everything from the most important down to the least important of transactions have to be recorded in the journal. So, and lastly, the last part of the definition would be enregistré de façon chronologique. So, registered in a chronological order. Each transaction has a corresponding date to it. So, we have transactions running from the 1st to the 30th or the 31st of each month. So, in the journal, would record those transactions by order of their date. So whatever happened on the 1st must be recorded. Then we move on to the 2nd, move on to the 3rd, and so the suite. So yeah, that's it with the definition. Then we start with when drawing up the journal, each transaction has to have certain things. Or if it's lacking any of the things that I'm going to mention, any of the following things, it cannot be recorded. So firstly, we have the date. Each transaction is supposed to have the corresponding date to it in order to respect the chronological order in the definition of the journal entries. Secondly, we have the comptabilité. So each transaction has two correspondents. We have the debit and the credit correspondence. So each and every transaction should have a debit and a credit correspondent, because that's the only way we'll be able to have an equality between the debit and the credit side, which I'm going to explain later. And thirdly, we have le numéro de compte. So le numéro de compte, these are the red book which I had talked about earlier. It has transactions, already written transactions. So, and those transactions have corresponding numbers, which we call code, they're codes. So each and every journal entry must have a code. So what these codes just help, it's more like accounting language. So it's a logical way of explaining a transaction under the Moroccan system of accounting. Then we have, lastly, the libellé. The libellé is just a small explanation of what really transpired in the transaction. So now we move on to how exactly we establish this journal. So I'd like to draw your attention onto the figure on your screen. So firstly, we have the numéro de compte. The numéro de compte is simply the codes that you draw from that red book. So these are codes that are, oh, I forgot to mention that those codes, you are going to be required to memorize them. In my case, my professor told me I cannot enter with the red book in an examination. So they're quite a lot, yes, but they are going to simplify them by giving them to you the most relevant. We have transactions that we will not do in S1, do them later on. So your professor is obviously going to simplify it for you, hopefully. But you have to memorize these by heart. So you have to know if Ashad de Meshandis is 611. These are things that you're just supposed to know. You're not even supposed to think. This should be like impulse reflexes. So we have the first column. Do not mind this very, very first column. We do not use it. So we start from the second one, which is numéro de compte, and under that we have debit. So what the transaction which is debited has a corresponding code, which is the one you write here. So the codes run from class 1 to class 8. And in the same transaction, we would have a transaction which is corresponding to the negative side. So in that transaction, we would have a corresponding code. So yeah, you record that code on the credit side. Sorry. Then here we have the libellé. The libellé, like I had said before, is a small explanation of what really transpired in the transaction. So then this is where I would say the work is done. So we have the date. The date is written just before you start the new book. Yes?
I'm a little behind on the codes. You mean that the codes in terms of numbers represents the accounting language?
Yes, it's the accounting. It's more like the accounting language in the Moroccan system. For example, I would say achat de marchandises.
Okay.
That the code for achat de marchandises is 6,111. That's the code. That's the code for every every transaction which says achat de marchandises. That's the code. So there are instances where you will not have, well, it doesn't have to do with the journal, but with other documents. They will not give you like what transaction was written. They'll just give you the code. So it's up to you to know what that code represents. So if it's Van de Marchandise, which is 7,111. So you are, when they give you 7,111, you are supposed to know that, okay, this is Van de Marchandise, and you know how to treat it. So yeah, that's what they mean by the codes. They are just simply ways in which the Moroccan system classifies accounting transactions. I hope I'm clear there. So moving on to what I was saying before, we have this box, this main big box is where you really have to put in the work. So we have the compte debité, each transaction. Let's say achat de marchandises, case. So when we buy goods, that will be the compte debited. So we'd write there, achat de marchandises. Here where there is compte debité, would replace it with achat de marchandises with the date, let's say 1st January 2020. So we'd have achat de marchandises there, and achat de marchandises is 6,111. And the compte à crédit is the credit side of the transaction, like the same transaction at the credit side. So if we bought marchandise with cash, the cash would be the credit side of this transaction. So we'd write case, and case is 5,161. That is the code. So that's how you write it. So here you'd write the compte. Then notice something is that here we have a. We have the preposition a. So what this simply means is that when you write the debit compte here, the credit compte is supposed to start from the middle of this column, this box. It's supposed to start from the middle. So you're not supposed to write this credit here. No, that would be considered wrong with some professors, but it's really subjective to who teaches you and how strict they are. So when you write the debited account there, then just below it, or starting from the middle of the box, you'd write the credited account. Then the libellé would be a small explanation of what really happened in the transaction. So in the example I gave before, which is achat de marchandises par caisse, you would simply write as the libellé achat de marchandises. It's just really a small explanation of what really happened. Then here we have figures. So let's say you bought the goods at 5,000, you'd write the 5,000 there. And if you bought the goods at 5,000, it means you lost 5,000 worth of cash. So we're going to have a 5,000 there and there. So a 5,000 there, well, the first dots on your left-hand side, and a 5,000 there. So in this column, like these last two, they are called montant, which is amount. So we have amount debited to your left and amount credited to your right. So these should normally be equal. So here we don't have the principle of the sort. They should always be equal. So I hope I'm clear with that. And what happens? Excuse me?
Could you kindly explain on the first debit and credit column?
Of which one? Of which main column?
The debit and credit, the N compte.
N compte. Okay, numéro de compte. So numéro de compte, there's that red book which is called the Plan Comptable Général. The Plan Comptable Général is simply a list of transactions arranged in chronological order. So we have transactions which are arranged in chronological order, and we use those transactions to, let's say, I would simply say those transactions are our accounting language. So with those transactions, there are some which by their nature are debited and some by their nature are credited. So which is the reason why we have these two distinctions. So you guys, I'm really hoping you'll be able to get that book over this weekend, because some explanations are really not given to you in full, because I haven't yet explained that red book. It's really important. You have to, you're going to have to buy it in the first semester, so you might as well just buy it now, so that you don't have to stress. For the guys in Saleh, I know a bookshop I can suggest where you would find it. The ladies in the CK, I will ask one of my friends where she got hers. So drawing back to our explanation, we have this NCONT it's an abbreviation for numerical decont, the account number. So we have certain accounts that are debited in their nature. Okay, Moscow was portrayed. Okay, good. So I think I'll be able to give the explanation for the red book so that you're able to understand fully what these transactions, like these codes I keep on mentioning. So we have certain accounts which are debited, like they are strictly debited in their nature. And we have certain accounts which are strictly credited. So those accounts have corresponding codes. So those codes are what we put on these dots here. Yeah, I hope that makes it clear to the person who asked.
It's clear, thank you. Okay,
so then this journal is really, really something long, but luckily is that every after a new date, you close it. So here, just before this second date, below libele, where it's written libele, you draw a line from here to the end. It means this account is closed. So you'd have nothing more to do with this account. And yeah, the procedure follows suit. Yeah, it's just the same throughout. You'd have another transaction on a later date and record it the same way. Compte debité, compte crédité. I think I have an example for you to. Okay. So now to sum up our how we draw the journal, we have totals. We have a total for this column. Sorry. These last two columns, which are called the colonne de montant, the amount columns, they have figures, they have corresponding figures. So you're not supposed to add them at the end of the date, no, because that's not what you do. You will just write the figures, just keep them, no addition, no math involved. But what you would need to do is find the total of each individual column. So let's say debit side, you'd have to add everything you have on this column specifically until the end. Here, you'd have an amount. Then on this credit side as well, you'd have to add everything on this individual column until the bottom, and you'd have a total there. So you're supposed to have totals only at the end of an accounting period, which is 12 months. So yes, only at the end of all the exercises will you have totals. So I hope that makes it clear with how you draw it. Then we move on to the characteristic du journal, like its characteristics. I would start with the first one. Yes?
Before we move on, I have a question.
Yes?
So for the segment of the total, there's something about there where it says numero de l'opération. Is there a certain type of code which you're supposed to put to sum up the total, or what does that indicate?
No, there's no code to sum up the totals.
Okay, all right, thanks.
I think these explanations were supposed to be put at the top here. It's what I was explaining before, but they were placed at the bottom for some reason. So then there's another question on the chat. Let me just look at it. In closing the accounts, do we draw the line of the accounts or only on both of the account and more down? So here, I presume you took accounts in Zambia. That question for closing accounts. We don't do that here. So we do not close accounts for whatsoever reason. We just leave them just that way. We are not supposed to draw any lines to signify an account is closed. So I hope that's clear on closing accounts. We do not close them. Yes, so any further questions, concerns?
Is it mandatory that the total must be equal or they differ in some way?
They differ in some circumstances.
Okay.
But if they do, you'd have to use the same logic of the sold. But treating it as, this whole thing, treating it as one, not to say if the difference is there, you'd find the difference of that one. No, but treating the whole book as one thing. So when you have the total of both sides, and it so happens that one side is greater than the other, you'd have to calculate the sold. And that would be placed just here, just before the totals. You'd have to add this sold to the amount which is lesser to make it equal.
So it's more like the balance brought down and carried down, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's exactly what sold is.
All right.
Any other questions, concerns, explanations?
Sorry, Chalwe.
Yes?
You said that the debit and credit side must be equal, right? They should have equal amounts.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So if there's 5,000 on the debit, there'll be 5,000 on the credit?
Yes, concerning the same transaction.
Okay, so if all the amounts are equal, won't the total be equal as well for both sides?
Yes, that would be the situation.
So an instance where the total is different, how?
Okay, generally the total isn't supposed to be different. It's supposed to be equal at all circumstances. It's actually what I was going to move on to next to explain. But generally the journal is equal on both sides. But I'm just making you have an open mind in case you find a circumstance where the other side is less than the other side. You just giving you an idea of how you would be able to work out that.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Okay. Just a minute, let me read this question. Oh yes, when you have, I think this question is from Margaret. When you have a transaction, you do not add the totals of an individual transaction. You just keep them. You just write the figures. I think I have an example here. This. Okay, so this is a complete illustration of the journal. Software, they did not add the totals to this one. So these are the codes I was talking about, the codes that will be placed here. Except in this one, they've put them together. They haven't chosen to distinguish which one is credited and which one is debited with the codes. So that would be up to you. But this is how it looks. So with this individual transaction for the first, concerning the 1st of July, we have 5,000 there. We have 5,000 on our left and 5,000 on our right. So we will not find the totals of this 5,000. We just leave them blank and would have 50 for the next transaction, which is on the 20th. We have 50,000, 50,000. We'll leave them blank. So the only total you are to find is for all the columns, like the whole individual column onto your left and the whole individual column onto your right. So hope that makes things a bit more clear. So I can move on to what follows.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to look at the characteristics of a journal. Firstly, we have, it says pour chaque écriture, le total des montants de débit doit être égal à le total des montants de crédit. So both sides are supposed to be equal. That's in their nature. They're supposed to be. But if you find that you have an equality between the two, you can try it. You can counter check your work or try to compensate for it with a solid. And so then lastly, the last characteristics is that there's
Sure,
a
can
document.
you kindly like share your screen so that we can also be able to see what you're reading?
So I'm reading from a hard copy polycopy I had in my first semester. So I wasn't able to find the information online.
Okay, all right, thanks.
So the last one is, there's a document called the balance, which follows just after the journal. There's a document, there's a balance and the Grande Livre. These two follow after the journal. So the last characteristic is that the total of the journal, the total at the bottom, is supposed to be equal to the total of the balance. But yeah, we're going to get to that later on. So that marks the end of the journal. So this polycopy I'm going to see if I can get it scanned into a PDF form, then just send it to you, because it really gives the notes in a simplified manner. Because when I was going through the book I actually sent you, some things are not quite visible, like the journals, the Grande Livre, all those things are missing. So I don't know if it's an advanced book or maybe just a part. So
Charlie, I just have a quick question.
yes.
So according to the Moroccan standard, for numéro de compte à débiter and numéro de compte accrédité, most of the examples which I've seen, it's like that column where you're supposed to enter the code from the plan comptable. It's like it's just one code, but from the examples of how to draw up the journal, we're seeing two separate columns. So I don't know, according to the exam standard, which one is which? Is it okay if you come up with one column and you put both codes, or maybe it's better to have two separate columns?
Okay, I get your question. So it's really dependent on your professor, but like here's something that I was actually doing today. It's something a bit advanced, though this is the same logic. It's the fact this is a journal. So here we have them placed on the same side, but what really distinguishes debit from the credit would be is the way you write them. Let's say, I don't know if you can see. I guess that makes it clear. So we have this first one, which is 65957. This transaction is placed closer to the end, closer to the left-hand side of the box. So meaning this is debited, and the credit one is placed starting from the middle of the box to going towards the right-hand side. So this is what helps distinguish debit from credit as well. But concerning the codes, it's just really dependent on how your professor gives it to you. You'd have to follow what he says to the dot, or else some people are just funny. They would say, no, you didn't do it the way I taught you, so I'm going to deduct some marks. I'm just helping you have the general understanding. So it depends. To make it simple, it depends on your professor.
All right, thanks.
Okay. So there's another question which I haven't. Okay, so do you have this book? This book which is on my screen currently. Okay, so you have the book. Okay, good. I'm going to look for. The thing is that this book is a bit. Some people don't. Some people have it. I'll try to resend it via Google Drive, or maybe. Okay, I will try to resend it and tell you later on how I will do it. But it would be better if I sent you the simplified version which our professor gave us. So moving on to something else, we are going to look at what is called le Grande Livre. So this one also works on the principle of comptes, but this one is a bit. It's not one. I know it's called le Grande Livre, but it's not one individual book the way we draw the others. It's by definition, le Grande Livre is a summation of different compte schematics. So it's an addition of compte schematics. Compte schematics are these small accounts that you're able to see. So, and it's drawn from the journal. So the transaction that you'd have from the journal, you'd use them to draw this book here, over here. I'm really sorry, the internet doesn't really have proper examples or explanations. I think Morocco hasn't yet reached on that level of internet. But this is how it's supposed to look like. So I'm just going to give you a short explanation, and we are going to have a petit pause. So for starters, this Grande Livre is a list of accounts, compte schematics to be specific. So compte schematic is just here where we have capital. This is a compte schematic, just this whole part where we have capital. So which is the first one to your top left. So this one would be an individual compte schematic. So how this book is drawn is that it's in chronological order, except unlike the journal, it's in chronological order of the code. Since, like I said before, we have codes running from 1 to, not 1 rather, but running from 1,000 to 8,000. And this one is in chronological order of those codes. So all the codes which start with 1 are placed first. All the codes which start with 2 second, 3, and so the suite. So we have the compte capital. How you draw it is that I'm going to do this. We have transactions from the journal, and let's say our first transaction is started a business with capital of 20,000 in this case. So we'd record that in the journal. And after we establish the whole journal and we come to what is called the Grande, we would have to write the compte de capital as the first one because it falls under class 1. So everything which is class 1 would be placed first, class 2 secondly, class 3 thirdly, and so the suite. So from that transaction I gave, started the business with 20,000. An example would be this first one to your top left. So we have 20,000 placed on our right hand side. So what we have here is now an issue of sold. So the amounts that we put in this Grande Livre are the sold of the individual journal accounts before. I don't know if you are able to get that. Is it clear, or maybe I'm moving too fast?
Kindly repeat just the previous statement.
Okay, so I'll start from the example. So the example I am giving is started a business with 20,000. So that started a business is called capital. So that capital has an individual account which is 1,111. So 11111. So that capital it's an account. Then we are going to look at it on an individual basis. So that 20,000 is going to be strictly okay. So okay, let me just finish up with my point, then I'll get to the SC question. So that 20,000 I had mentioned before is going to be, since you know that capital is credited, when you come to the journal, you are going to credit the amount of 20,000. So you're going to have to credit the amount. So you're just really supposed to know the accounts, like the nature of the accounts, like if it's class 1. So as a petite explication is class 1, those are financement permanent. These are strictly credited, except there are some exceptions, but these are credit counts. Then we have class 2, which are the immobilisation. These immobilisation are debited in their nature. All of them are debited, except there are some exceptions. And we have class 3. These are debited as well, which are the active secular, which are current assets. These are debited. Then we have class 4, which is the passive secular, or the debt, the petit debt. These are also credited. Then class 5 is subdivided into 2. We have 5.1, which has a debit, which is debited in nature, and we have 5.5, which is credited in nature. So now drawing back to the question, which was, what does SC stands for? Solde crédité. Then SD stands for solde débiteur. So SC solde créditeur, SD solde débiteur. So I don't know if there's need for other. We are not yet done with this, but what I have said until now, are you satisfied, or maybe questions, concerns? Okay, everything seems to be clear. So let's have like a 10 minutes break. I need to look for a better explained example. So we'll be back at 13:02. Please be there at 13:02, not Zambian time. I have found an example that would help you better understand how things move. So this is a question of, this is how a question will be phrased. there will be transactions with corresponding dates and what happened. For example, this first one, which is on the 5th of January. Acquisition d'un voiture de montant par chèque bancaire. Yeah. So this is a transaction and it has two sides. It has two effects. It has a debit and a credit side. So we're going to have to register it into our books of accounts, but I don't know if you'd like me to send you an example which I have done myself, or maybe just les explications, ça marche.
You can send the example.
Okay. So not to waste too much of our time, I will send it. Hopefully this evening, hopefully. So I'll send an example starting from the questions how they're phrased, drawing to the journal, drawing to the Grande Livre. Yeah, so this is how questions are phrased. They are phrased as individual transactions with corresponding dates. So from these transactions, then you'd have the travail à faire. The travail à faire, that's what you'd have. But this one isn't exactly the way it doesn't comprise everything we've learned, so we're just going to skip it. So this is a part which now interests me, which is a Grande Livre. You would start with, like I said, there are classes. So when you write class 1, you would have to include all the accounts which are class 1 type. So for this example, I don't think there was anything of class 1. So they strictly went to class 2. So we have this one, which is 2,311. Terrain is like it's premises. So we have an amount of, it's in on the 1st, and we have an amount of 1,200. 100 and 200,000. Sorry. Yeah, so this amount would be, it's credited in its nature because I think they must have used these premises as means of capital, like to start the business. And this sword it comes up because we don't have anything on this individual account. We don't have anything on our right. So we lack anything there. So 0 minus, this figure minus 0 would give us the same figure. So that's why the solde is of this amount. So SD is solde debitor. Can you scroll up once we want to screenshot? Okay. It's in the book. It's on page 70. It's in the book. I actually found it in the book. But you can take a screenshot. Hold up. Yeah. So yeah, I can take a screenshot. Avec plaisir. So we move on to so after you are done with all the class 2, so you're supposed to know. That's why the issue of memorizing comes in. When you see a transaction, you should be able to tell that this one falls under this class, or it falls under that class, or you might risk making mistakes. So there's really a lot of memorizing in your first semester. So I'm of course, but it's not hard. It's manageable. So we move on to class 3. Class 3, we have things like merchandise. We have class 3 is non-fixed assets, or rather current assets. So we have merchandise, which is good spot for the purpose of resale. We have clients. I think those are all we had here. So the reason we're having this SD and this, these SDs and SC is, the logic is that they try to balance the account, if I should say. So this is the balance brought forward and balance brought down. For the people who don't know what that is they have 70,000 here. So this count, the machine, this, let me just enlarge it. So yeah, so let's scratch this off, forget this SD. So we have 70,000 to our left, and to our right we have 0, we have nothing. So when we draw up 2 lines to try to find out the total of the left hand side would be 70,000, and of the right hand side would be 70,000 automatically, because we use the total. What we write as the total is the figure, is a summation of the largest side. So let's say the credit side has 50, the debit side has 20. What would be the total is 50. So we use the summation of, or the addition of, the side which is greatest. So in this case, we have 70 on our left and 70 on our right. Now, this account is not balanced because it has nothing here. We have absolutely 0 here. So we're going to add a 70,000 to our right hand side so that this account is balanced. So the total on the left hand side is 70,000, and the total on our right hand side is now 70,000 because we've added something. So, and that amount we add, the difference we add, is what corresponds to either our sold creditor or our sold debitor. I hope that makes it clear with where we remove the SD, SC. So moving on to, yes?
So in a scenario where we have both figures on both sides, there won't be any need to indicate the SD or the CB.
SC. Yes, exactly. So if we have our transaction as equal on both sides, we would have no need to write the SOD. So the SOD is strictly the difference between the greater side and the lesser side.
All right, thanks.
Okay, cool. So from class 3, this is supposed to be class 4, but I think the transaction above doesn't have that as well. So it went on to class 5, which is, so like I said before, class 5 has 2 main subdivisions. There is 5.1, which is debited in nature, but then there's 5.5, which is credited in nature. So we have 5,141, which is bank, and we have the amount there. The SD, because the SD is the same figure, because the other side has 0, so the difference is the exact same figure. So we move on to, in fact, we have the passive here. So the way they arrange this, these are just counts in general. It's not the Grande Livre. The Grande Livre is in chronological order. So if you write class 1, you start with class 1. So, sorry, which is here, you start with class 1. So immediately you are done with class 1, you write class 2, and you finish up with everything in class 2. Immediately you're done with that, class 3, class 4, and they run all the way to, if you're dealing with the biller, they run all the way to class 5. If it's the CPC included, they run on to class 7. So that's it. I don't know if you have questions, concerns, re-explanations that are needed. I'm at your disposal.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, please.
So for the same Grande Livre. In a scenario, for instance, maybe in an exam, is there a situation whereby you have to register the details which were carried out by a company? So maybe we're getting from the source documents, maybe let's say the journal and the biller. So when recording in the Grande Livre, is there like an order from which book we should start with? Like, do we start from the biller or the journal, or maybe
okay, so
it's just strictly
you are
to the
speaking
classes?
you are speaking of the order in how we should arrange the books.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have. Okay, just a minute. I think I must have that. The thing I had sent you before is, I know teaching you are going to start, your professors are going to start with the Bilang and the CPC, but these are to be recorded last. They only start with them because they are important. They are more important than the others, and you need a general understanding of these it takes time for someone who's never taken accounts, who's never heard of anything concerning the Bilang. And when you just provide them with a bill, no, this is that you put there, it would be hard for them to understand. So these things like the journal, they're quite easy. So the first thing we record is the pièces justificatives, which are source documents in French. Then from the source documents, we move on to the journal. Then from the journal, we move on to the Grande Livre, and from there on, we move on to the balance. So in counting, I think that should be source document. There are a number of source documents, if you didn't know. So yeah, you take them from a number of source documents. So the journal makes it the second one, the Grande Livre third, the balance fourth. And for the fifth one, we have what we call the bilan and the CPC. So the reason why these are recorded at the end is because they show the financial position of a business as at a given date. So we are only able to, or we should only be able to check our financial position at a given date. Let's say you set, in an example of a government, they set goals and they draw a budget. So they should only be able to evaluate, or they should rather only evaluate their progress, or if they've been able to meet the budget's needs and wants at the end of the time they had set for themselves. So in accountancy, it's usually a year, which is called in exercice financier. So that accounting period is a period of 12 months. So we establish them at the end to be able to see whether our business has been profitable or of loss in the past 1 year. So I don't know if that answers your question. So there's an order in which you actually record them. Although there are instances where they would give you a transaction, then they would require you to start with the biller. So that sort of transaction is, maybe there was an accounting period, then it's finished, and we're starting a new accounting period, let's say, and we have finished it as well. So they would require the details from the old one to be able to, from the old one. So the details just keep on going. So from the old one, you draw up something, you find the totals, you check. And from there, again, you start with the same goods and services onto a new accounting period, and you are at the end of it. So I don't know if that's clear, or maybe you got lost in my explanation somewhere.
Oh, it's clear. If I have other questions, I'll hit you up.
Okay, so now I have
like you record those transactions in the Grande Livre. I don't know, perhaps I'm wrong, but okay, I kind of remained on the way, like, how we move from all these documents and ended up by the Grand Livre.
Okay, cool. I understand your
Just
question.
an
So,
addition,
excuse me?
yeah, just an addition to what is from asking.
Okay.
Um, uh, does this come from one question where you draw a bilan, then the rest of the accounts, or you have different types of questions?
Okay, I understand you. So, the way they would give you, I think I have. So it's sort of like a ladder, like someone has put it. It's the questions are progressive. They start with something. So actually, you start with the journal. Though, like I explained before, we have circumstances where you have to start with the bilan, and you would have to record the bilan first, then you start with the journal. So the questions are just these. These are the questions. This is how they'll give you. I don't know if you are able to see them. So it's simply a date, a transaction, and corresponding figures. So you are the one to be able to classify it in its account, in its class. So the first thing you start with is the journal. The journal, usually like the journal. Let's say this is this. In fact, we take this as the source document, the pièce justificative. So from then we'll develop a journal, and from the journal we develop the Grande Livre. So the reason why we write those conts, the class font in the journal, is for it to be easier for us. Like if you had conts on, just a minute, this book is big. I'm having trouble finding clear-cut examples. Okay, sorry. So if you have these transactions right here, so this is how the questions come. I should have told you this first. So this is the case, and they'll just simply give you, hold up, the screen is too blocked. Yes. So they'll give you transactions, simple transactions. So what counts is how you record them. Then you start. This is the source document. So then you start. You go to the journal. To the journal, you write them just according to that in chronological order of their dates. So you write the 2nd January. You classify them, the counts and all that. Then from after you have established your journal, you move on to the Grande Livre. So the Grande Livre is also a book in chronological order, but with the aid of the classes. So remember we had a column for classes, which is, we have a column for classes in the journal. Bon, what an example. So we have this column for classes. So when you start the Grande Livre, you'd simply go capital. You just look at the classes. Which number comes first? Okay, this one. So you get this one, and you make, let's say for this one, capital, 500,000. So you go to this one. I don't know if you're able to follow through. Then you go to this one. Then for the first capital, since capital came as, it had the first class. So this one is in chronological order of classes. It had the first class. So here you have capital. And that in that case, it was 500,000. You'd record 500,000 here. Then we move on to the next one. You look for something with 1 again. If there's nothing, you skip to class 2. You skip to class 3, just like that. So yes, in fact, this question going to Messi. You would have no need to use the transactions. So when making the entries for the Grande Livre, for the bilan, for the CPC, you just use the document you established before. So after you've made the journal, to make the grand leave, you just use the information from the journal. So you'd have no need to look back at the transactions. So immediately you've established a book, you just look at the book before it to establish what you want to. Yes. You just carry the balances, that's it. So I don't know if that's clear at Davis and Harold, I think.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so then you guys, I wanted to ask one more thing. Have you been, I know you've already had your orientation, but have you been, no need for the sword, or, for example, let's take you consider this one placed just right in front of you. We have bank, capital. So this transaction, if in my view, it was started a business with 500,000 in the bank. Now, when we write that in the journal, it will translate to this bank. We have that figure, same figure, and for capital social, we have the same figure. So there's no need for sort here, really. You just have to classify them and write the figure which corresponds to it. I don't know if that's clear. Yes, Linda, it can be sort of equated to that. The problem is there's really no direct relation between the French system and the English system. There are some differences. So if I try to sort of make that link, it's like some people understand things and others will be completely lost. For people who never took accounts, no any business related subject. But yes, it's something like that. Same goes to the cash book. No. For, I don't know whose iPhone. For the cash book, if my memory serves me right, only record cash transactions. Yes, I think that was the whole essence of the cash book. So something which didn't involve cash, like a credit, we did not record. So I wouldn't say the journal is an exact equivalent of the cash book. Oh, so
I
Jeff,
have a question, Chole.
yes.
Is it like in Zambia where you actually draw up accounts, like let's say a cash account, and then you take the information that you have from there and take it to like the journal, and then it progresses? Or do you not have like an account, like an account like the comp, or you just, yeah, like you just ignore it? Like you're given a question, a transaction, do you, let's say, make a cash account, and then from that cash account you take it to the, I don't know if you get what I'm saying.
Yes, I do. I have actually put something on the screen too.
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
So
so you do not make an account, an individual account. You just, from this same dates, you just, so you really have to memorize, which is why I'm saying can memorize them but because from this one, like this first one, when you just see it, you're just supposed to know that, okay, this is that. There's really no other place you're supposed to place it before the journal, or you're not supposed to make any individual account, because in accounting, one thing I forgot to mention is time. Time is also an issue because there are a lot of things to draw. This answers Jeff's question. He said, do we draw the tables by ourselves? Yes, you draw the tables by yourself. You memorize all of them. You draw them by yourself. You know what to put. There's really no spoon feeding. So and for the exam, they just give you a plain paper, and another plain paper with the questions. So then to
Okay.
continue with the question is that you do not write any separate accounts or anything like that. You strictly just move from the question to the answers. So the answers would be the journal, the Grande Livre, the balance, the bilan, the CPC. It's really not much. I think it's seeming to be a bit too much because it's your first time. With practice, it will become really easy. Yeah, you are welcome. So, don't know if there are any more questions, concerns.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
The codes, the ones you talked about that you have to master, are they only used in the Grand Livre?
No. So throughout your ENCG and economics life, you are going to need those codes. And use them in the journal. But for S1, use them in the journal, use them in the Grand Livre, use them in the balance. And you don't really write them in the bilan, but you have to know. Like the example before, there were classifications. The bilan was divided into financement permanent, active sécular, passive sécular. So it's those codes which help you know what is what, which is what, rather. So throughout your ENCG life and you're going to need the codes.
Okay, when drawing the journal, is the information coming from what is on the screen? And if this is the case, how are you relating the journal that is coming from the below and from this information?
Okay, so how to establish the journal? Yes, you strictly use the information which is currently on your screen. So this is how questions would come to you normally. I'm not saying this is the only way. You might encounter different sort of presentations of questions, but this is a normal one I have seen. Secondly, to the part where you said the bilan, do we establish the journal from the bilan? No, we don't. From the bilan is to be placed as the end document. It's one of the last ones. Last. These journals and the others, they come before the bilan. There's a car that I think I'll better explain it later. Okay, so I guess that marks the end of our call for today. So I'm going to speak to my friend doing economics and try to see when he's free and ask you guys when you'll be free so that we have the subject explanation, because it's really going to catch you by shock if you just reach and the professor is saying something else that you don't even know. It will help you at least be able to know how you're going to go about climbing each mountain. So yeah, I guess that's it. Have a wonderful day, and yeah.
Thank you, you too.
Thanks.
I've sent a question.
Now next time, can we have a question then? Do all the books. Okay. So I'll send you the question over the weekend. So I was going to send it today, but it's a Friday, so I won't lie to myself. So I'll send it over the weekend, and you have a look at it, ask me where questions are concerned, and next time we continue with our call. So I hope that's all right.
And what will we be doing next week so that we can just like go through?
Plan the call. Okay, I'll send over the plan the call as well.
All right,
I need
thanks.
to study before I give you. All right, Safi.